Sound. Thank you, Diamonds. Thank you, Vanessa. Oh, Jazzy? Yeah, she's a traitor. She abandoned me for her mama. All right. If you have not, I repeat, not heard of the Arlis Perry case, put a 1 in the comments. I'm just curious. What's up, Zen? Good to see you. So Jennifer says, nope, I've never heard of it. Diamond says, nope, haven't heard of it. Oh shit, cults. Let's get rid of these crazy people. Problem is, some of these cults are pretty organized. Hey, what's up, Derek? And this case is also from 1974. I think the other one's technically 1975. Error 415 says, Ultimate Evil got everything wrong about this crime. Yeah, I want to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about all of that. We're not going to say either way. We're just going to discuss it. Oh yeah, that just makes them scary, the fact that they're organized. Zen, I haven't had a chance to, but I will right after this live stream. I plan to listen to it today. All right, let's jump into it. So Arlis Kay Perry, and that's who you see there in the center image. She was born February 22nd, 1955, and she died October 12th, 1974. She was a 19-year-old American newlywed who was murdered inside Stanford Memorial Church within the grounds of Stanford University in California on October 12th, 1974. The murder went unsolved for more than 40 years before police named Stephen Blake Crawford as the perpetrator following DNA profiling in 2018. Crawford, he was a security guard at Stanford who reportedly discovered the body, died by suicide before he could be arrested. Now, there is going to be viewer discretion advised because this is a pretty gruesome case. So what I think we're going to do today on this one is I'm going to play some of the news clips that I think will help give you the background on the case. And then once you kind of have a grasp of the basic facts around the case, we'll look into how they're trying to tie it into some other satanic ritualistic killings like the Son of Sam and that same cult back in the 1974 70s era. Remember, there's a lot of serial killers going around at that time. I even think Kemper was out running around. You know, of course, you had the Son of Sam stuff. So yeah, the law enforcement had their hands full. So let's start with this clip here, and then we'll kind of build up as the case starts to develop. We'll take a look at some of these pressers. And then in the second presser, the sheriff actually mentions the book that we're going to dive into here, which is The Ultimate Evil. And that is what Error 415 was referring to. Ultimate Evil got everything wrong about this crime, is what Error was stating. We'll talk about that. Yeah, it's very crazy.
And disturbing, and for years the debate has raged over whether this killing was part of a satanic ritual. Arlis Perry was 19 years old at the time of her brutal death. Officials found her nude from the waist down in the back of the church. She was molested with a 3-foot candlestick and died by a blow from an ice pick to the head. The theory that Perry's death was linked to a cult has been the subject of some books.
What they're spreading is the
What's up,
legend
Inyaka?
of the case.
Inyaki.
And then these cases take on a life of their own.
Kenneth Lanning is a former FBI agent and author. He says in many cases, the only people who truly know what happened are the investigators assigned to the specific case. His definition of a satanic murder?
It would have to be committed by 2 or more people to have some kind of a spiritual or religious connotation. You have to.
See, this Kenneth Lanning guy, this FBI agent, I don't know if you guys remember a case. What was it? Oh, man, the name. Was it Keller? Fan and Dan Keller? Is that right? The Kellers, yeah, Fan and Dan Kellers. So if I remember correctly, it was Kenneth Lanning who was part of that case, and those guys ended up getting exonerated. I guess 6 children at a daycare accused them of ritualistic child, some type of assault. I don't know the extent of it, but it was they were accused of touching the children there, and it was 6 children, and they all had their stories kind of lined up together, and they were able to get these guys convicted, but everything's been overturned. They pursued them again, and then eventually they were cleared completely, exonerated 100%. And it's strange because if you watch them, they seem guilty, but they weren't, you know what I mean? But they still served 21 years in prison. But this guy right here, Kenneth Lanning, was involved in that case, and it was involved a satanic ritual or ritualistic sexual abuse of children as well. Just a little tidbit.
Have multiple people involved.
But
The case was out of Evansville, Indiana, if I'm not mistaken.
the Satanic Theory has spread in pop culture. With today's major break in the case, it's possible investigators could look back into those claims, says ABC News security consultant Stephen Gomez.
The investigators are going to look at the motive for why she was killed. And if there was any kind of satanic reference at the crime scene, or now that they figure this is the suspect in the homicide, was that suspect aligned with some kind of satanic ideology?
And Stephen goes on to say authorities will determine if there were any other people involved in Perry's killing. Now, the theory that her death was linked to a cult has been a pop culture belief as well as the subject of several books. One book written by a former reporter suggests that Perry was killed on instruction from Satanists who followed her from her hometown in North Dakota. It also suggests the man convicted in the Son of Sam murders knows something about it.
Case, the killing took place in a church at Stanford.
Well, within the past 10 minutes, the Santa Clara County Sheriff wrapped up a press briefing. NBC Bay Area's Robert Honda has been on this story all day and brings us the latest.
The crush of officers at this apartment complex on Camden Avenue in San Jose today centered around a cold case from 1974, the so-called satanic murder of 19-year-old Arlis Perry, who was found inside a Stanford church, apparently ritualistically raped and killed. Sheriff's deputies went to the apartment to serve a search warrant on 72-year-old Steve Crawford. This is an old social media picture of the man who was the security guard at the church at the time. The sheriff's department said retesting of old DNA put the man, identified later as Crawford, back in the center of the investigation. But when officers arrived, the sheriff said he shot and killed himself.
He knew that our investigators have focused on him as a suspect.
Former Mercury News columnist and now aspiring crime author Scott Harold has been researching the 1974 case. Despite Crawford's seemingly harmless demeanor, including being the drum major at his high school, Harold said circumstances pointed to Crawford.
I always felt that whoever killed Arlis Perry was an insider, which is to say that her body was laid out in a kind of ritual
How dare this guy speculate? Shameful.
fashion that probably took the killer a half an hour to do. That's somebody who knows the rhythms of the church, knows that he will not be interrupted.
Well, as you heard, that assessment is something that Lori Smith is talking about right now in terms of how they got to this conclusion, and they are looking now at this hour for more evidence at the apartment to kind of tie up those loose ends. Stanford University also released a statement saying that they appreciated the efforts for the investigators to continue on this cold case, and they will also be releasing more details later as they say this case is still an ongoing investigation. We'll have an update tonight on our 11 o'clock newscast. Live in San Jose, Robert Honda.
74 cold case that led detectives to a San Jose apartment yesterday. Their prime suspect, Steve Crawford, shot and killed himself during that encounter. We're learning that Crawford had suicide on his mind for some time, as it turns out. ABC 7 News reporter David Louie is live at the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department with more on this. David?
Well, Dan, sheriff's detectives had hoped to gain some insight, perhaps some incriminating evidence, when they entered the San Jose apartment of Steve Crawford. But instead, they...
See, this is something that I fear in the Delphi case. You know, they got their eyes on somebody. We don't have a clue who this person is, but they're watching him, you know, and they just don't have enough evidence to press any charges or even make any accusations, you know, like they did with Daniel Nations. But this is how I see it playing out. They're going to catch on to this guy. They're going to catch wind of him, and similar situation is going to play out. Possibly.
Found details of his obsession with the 1974 murder case and about his own fate. The two most intriguing items detectives recovered from suspect Steve Crawford's studio apartment: the jacket cover of the book The Ultimate Evil, which detailed the brutal murder of 19-year-old Arlis Perry, and a 2-year-old suicide note believed to have been written after he had been interviewed by a sheriff's office detective. Crawford used a large revolver to shoot himself in the head as he was lying in bed. He had stalled detectives at the door trying to serve him with a warrant by saying he needed to get dressed. The 67-year-old sister of Arlis Perry told me by phone this brings closure to her.
It does for me. My mom, I'm not so sure. I mean, she's 88 years old and she's struggling with the why, I think. And I said, you know, Mom, I don't think we're ever going to know the why.
Even as DNA finally provided the breakthrough link to tie Crawford to the 44-year-old case, Sheriff Lori Smith agrees the motive will remain a mystery.
We'll never know the reason. I believe maybe a crime of opportunity.
Arlis Perry's body was found at the altar at Stanford's Memorial Church by Steve Crawford, who was a campus security guard. He said he had locked up the church that October night in 1974, then discovered the body early the next morning.
Wow. Man, so it's like this guy was the prime suspect. If we didn't have any answers today and we just knew the facts surrounding the case, you would look at this guy and be like, well, it's either him or her new husband, who apparently they had an argument that night. So thank God they solved the case, because the family has probably been looking at him a little bit, which must have been really hard on him. But this situation right here, I mean, they thought it was a crime of opportunity, but no, this dude, he had access, you know, I don't know, CPS building, or who had access to Ron Logan, whoever that could have been, you know, but it could be somebody very obvious to us, you know, like a PD or somebody like that, you know, because I mean, obviously in regards to the Delphi case, the FBI was looking at Ron Logan because it was just one of those obvious things, like, yeah, we got to check this out. It's completely obvious, you know. He could be the guy on the bridge. He was on his property. He knows the area, you know, checks off all these boxes. So this guy here checked off all the boxes, but they could just never get anything solid on him because they didn't have DNA technology.
She had been killed by an ice pick to the head. She had been sexually molested. Yet it took 44 years until investigators could use DNA to pin the crime on Crawford.
I've always believed that it was an insider because it took a while for the insider to lay her out in the sort of way she was done. This was somebody who was not going to be interrupted.
A sad note about the family of the murder victim, Arlis Perry. Her 91-year-old father died 3 months ago. His dying wish was to find out finally who had killed his daughter and why, but he never got that wish. We've also learned that Arlis's then-husband, renowned psychologist Dr. Bruce Perry, is relieved by the break in this case.
Zen, no, I do not watch football. You're the middleman now, Derek. Nope. I used to. I hate when sports become political. It just throws me off. Or like my favorite musicians, and I don't care like what it is, you know, whether they are aligning with me or whatever. I just don't like it. I don't think it belongs in entertainment. It spoils it. It's like over salting your food, you know, you're just like, ugh, like this was such a good meal. Put too much salt on it. Yuck. All right. So here's the presser. This is the first one. It's kind of hard to hear. It was really hard to find just this video. I think on a follow-up, I'm going to pull it into my Pinnacle Studio and I'm going to edit it to where I can cut all the media questions and the reporters' questions out and then kind of raise the volume so we can hear the conversation. She answers them well, so I apologize if you guys can't hear it. I spent a while trying to find a better copy. This is the best I could find.
Lost a wife. Our detectives have worked diligently over the years to solve the murder of Arlis. It comes with great honor to announce we solved the 43-year-old cold case. Stephen Blake Crawford, 72-year-old, was a security guard at Stanford University at the time of the murder. Crawford had been a person of interest since the beginning of the investigation. Our detectives continue to piece together additional information to this tragic puzzle, and we were able recently to link Crawford's DNA to the crime scene. Today, our detectives were serving a warrant, and when they knocked on the door of Crawford's residence, he killed himself. Our detectives are still at the scene searching the residence for additional evidence connecting Crawford to this murder and to any other unsolved murders. I cannot understate the efforts of our detectives. They've done an exceptional job. Many cold case homicide detectives have worked on this for years. We've followed all the leads and unraveled the entanglement of the evidence associated with the murder of Arlis Perry. We truly have a talented group of detectives who provide exceptional services to the residents of Santa Clara County. This is a case that eludes us no longer. Lead Detective Sergeant Richard Alanis kept this picture of Arlis Perry with him as a constant reminder that her life and this case had value. I'd be happy to take any questions from the media.
How does it make you feel? I mean, this is more than 40 years after the fact, and you've been able to use DNA evidence to bring the killer to justice.
This case was really personal to me. She was murdered just soon after I started the sheriff's office, and it was high profile at the time. It's been frustrating throughout the years that we could never get enough evidence to charge the suspect. It's difficult for her family, it's difficult for the department, but we finally have closure on this case.
How were you able to get Crawford's DNA?
The detectives had continually gone through the evidence, submitted additional evidence for testing. There was no DNA at the time of the murder, of course, but then there have been enhancements in their capabilities, so we just continued to submit the evidence to the crime lab, and it came from, I think...
Yeah, and I also pulled a video where they break down the DNA part of it, and they actually have one of the actual forensic analysts or scientists or whatever their official title is. She explains everything. She explains how far they've come with the technology, what technology they were using prior, what they're using now, and she goes into great detail. So we're gonna go into that a little bit more towards the end here.
An item of her clothing.
So what were they after going to the apartment today? What was the search warrant for? How did that come about?
Obviously, you need a lot of probable cause for a search warrant, which they had based on information that we had in the past. But today, they were executing the search warrant to see if they could find anything that would link him to the crime. And we'll get the press together again tomorrow, because I think our detectives are still searching his residence. The search was postponed because he killed himself, so the suicide had to be investigated while still preserving his scene, still preserving his apartment, so then we could go in and...
So imagine as a law enforcement agent or a police officer, you're going in to serve the search warrant. You have a key to the building, you know, you got a key to the residence, and you're looking through the window and you see the guy right there, and you're like, hey, come to the door, we got a search warrant. And the guy's like, no, let me put some clothes on and then I'll come to the door. 5-10 minutes go by, the guy never shows up. So now they're like, hey, you need you to come to the door, I see you there. They use the key, enter into the apartment, and see him sitting on the bed with a pistol in his hand. As soon as they see the gun, they run. Well, I don't know if it was a pistol. He had a gun in his hand. They kind of flee out of the building, and then they hear the pop. So now they're going in to investigate a cold case. They got their suspect. Now it's turned into another investigation. Like, how miserable is that? Because they can't just pick up the guy and be like, oh, he killed himself. No, because people are going to say, well, what if the police shot him, or what's going on? This looks like a conspiracy. They had body cam footage, but now it's like they have to do this other investigation now, the suicide investigation on top of that's just literally laying on top of all of the potential evidence that they're hoping for. That's just an insane thought.
Finish executing the search warrant.
And can you explain what initially cleared him that 44 years ago?
Nothing ever cleared him. There was just not enough evidence to charge him with the crime.
That sounds familiar.
Are there any other pieces of substantial evidence that you guys have come across in his apartment that may link him?
They're still doing the search. I think they're still doing it right now. They were when I talked earlier. And so we don't know the information on that, but we will get back to you if we do find anything additional. He knew he was a person of interest. He knew that we were continuing the investigation actively right now because our detective have talked to him recently. So I'm not sure if this was not unexpected for us to show up at his door.
Could you describe maybe some of those conversations that you guys had previously?
Just interrogations and trying to get additional information, elicit additional evidence. He didn't provide us anything concrete with enough to arrest at that time, but then we continued and were able to then get the search warrant.
Did the contact with him ramp up recently, or was this steady over the last however long?
It's been on and off throughout the years. We generally would have had a need to talk with him. Ramped up recently, absolutely.
Is there any connection between the known connection between the suspect and Arlis?
No, none at all. You know that she was murdered in the church at Stanford, and he was a security guard. I don't think we have any evidence at this time that they knew each other at Stanford, but they were both associated with Stanford. And so tomorrow we will have a lot more information. We'll be able to debrief with the detectives and see if they were able to find any additional information. And we'll follow up with you on that. So thank you very much for taking the time. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any other connection to him with any other violent crimes at Stanford?
Not that we're aware of now, but we're continuing to follow up. But no, we don't have any reason to believe that now.
I assume you did DNA testing prior. Were there any types of tests that emerged that you were able to connect him with?
There was evidence to the crime lab. They'd done DNA testing in the past, but we weren't able to get anything until recently.
Sure. Did you talk to the Perry family or anyone connected with them? If so, what have they expressed?
So we have reached out. Our detectives have talked with family members. They were appreciative of the notification. And that's about all the information I have, but we have reached out. So,
thank you very much, folks. We will hold another press conference tomorrow, so this will be it for tonight. Thank you so much for coming down today.
We were there to serve a search warrant.
Vanessa says, did they completely clear the husband? I'm not sure if they did or not, but I don't think I think he had an alibi. They did have a fight, and she's like, you know what, I'm going to go pray. Like, but that's kind of strange, because these serial killers are very cunning. And they're charming. So he could have somehow brainwashed her or something, They're both at Stanford. He could have maybe been privately communicating with her. I don't know. But he could have just been stalking her, really. If he's a security guard, he sees her run in there, he has he has the key to get in there. But the question is, why would she go pray there if she doesn't have a key? You know what I mean? So that kind of seems a little strange.
And we knocked on the suspect's door. He asked to take a few minutes to get dressed.
This is the presser that they promised, the follow-up. She goes into extreme detail, and she explains what's going on with the connection with the Son of Sam cult and stuff like that. So we'll briefly go into that information, and then we'll finish it out with the DNA stuff.
And our detectives remained outside for a few minutes. They thought he was stalling, so they had a key from the apartment manager, and so they keyed their way in, and they saw him there sitting there on the bed with a gun in his hand. And it was a studio apartment, so it was very, very small. The detectives retreated, just got out of the way of the door, and they heard one gunshot wound and found that he had taken his life with one gunshot wound to the head. Our detectives didn't fire any shots, and all of this was captured on body-worn camera. He was pronounced dead at the scene. And so during the search of the apartment, there were a couple of items of interest, nothing really linking the homicide, but a couple of interesting items. One, there was a box in his closet with some important papers in it, and in it was a book called The Ultimate Evil.
So this is the book she's referring to, The Ultimate Evil, an investigation of America's most dangerous satanic cult. It was written by this man, Maury Terry.
About serial killers. And the second item, there was a suicide note. The suicide note appeared to be hastily written. It had the date 2016 on it. And we think that coincides probably with the time that Detective Sergeant Alanis interviewed him. And I don't think he'd been interviewed in quite some time prior to that. And we're still analyzing the note. It did not reference anything about the murder. And it was garbled, difficult to read. And again, we're doing some more forensic evidence on that. A couple of factors led to us actually going to the house. We went there to serve a search warrant with the intent to arrest him. We had enough evidence at that time, even independent of the search warrant, to make the arrest, and that was our intent. The investigation, when we first discovered the DNA, from when we sent some additional evidence items to an outside lab and found DNA on her items, his DNA on her items. And so after that, we had to do several things like re-interview people. But one of the things that was time-consuming was we recontacted everybody that had been in the church that night 43 years ago and took their DNA and their fingerprints. We wanted to make sure that we ruled them out.
Okay, did you guys hear that? Listen to this.
Took their DNA and their fingerprints. Recontacted everybody that had been in the church that night 43 years ago and took their DNA and their fingerprints. We wanted to make sure that we ruled them out.
I wonder if they did that with Delphi. I wonder if they took everybody. I wonder if everybody provided their DNA, like regardless who they were. You know, if you were there at the trail that day, you gave your DNA. Because you could easily remove the word church with trails right here.
Several things like re-interview people. But one of the things that was time-consuming was we recontacted everybody that had been in the church that night 43 years ago and took their DNA and their fingerprints. We wanted to make sure that we ruled them out. And so everything was a culmination of all of the investigation that they had done since the time that we discovered the DNA. I cannot speculate on why he committed suicide, but I think that he might have believed that his time was up. Currently, we're still processing the car that was left at his apartment building. We have that, and we're processing that. You know, this was a terrible, terrible crime, and I really want to express my deepest sympathy to the family, her husband at the time, her other family members. Our detectives worked very, very hard on this for many years. Technology is such now that we are able to make arrests and clear cases based on what we have, not only just the existence of DNA, but also the technology in finding DNA on surfaces. So we look at this as closure, and we believe that we had solid evidence to arrest and even convict Stephen Crawford for the murder of Arlis Perry.
What do you hope to find in the car?
You know, with a search warrant, you never know what you can find. We were hoping to find something that would link him directly to the crime. 43 years ago, sometimes that's not possible. But I'm not sure that we will find anything other than we could find written material. You know, you never know when you search, but our detectives are really familiar with the case, and in looking through the car, they'll know what could be of value.
Do you think that he might be connected to some other cases, and that's why you're going through this with a fine-tooth comb?
You know, we're going through it because we want to continue to follow up all leads. You never know with homicide suspects, especially some that are so random at this time. And during this time, there were a lot of serial killers in this area. Kemper in Santa Cruz, and it seemed to be a real difficult time in this area and surrounding areas for serial killers. So we'll look at that. We have a chart of when he was living in this area, the number of unsolved homicides versus when he was not living in the area. That was one that one of the media outlets gave to me a few minutes ago, but we're always looking at that. I know that there's a lot more work to do on this case, even though the suspect that I believe is the killer is dead.
All right, let's take a look at a couple of these pages. This is from that book, The Ultimate Evil. Hey, how's it going, Cindy? Yep, he definitely had opportunity. I mean, this dude was running around with a 16-year-old girl in his car and sexual videos with her on his phone. Considered the most wanted person in Kokomo. Kokomo's most wanted is what they labeled him. And from my understanding, he would often visit Delphi. See, this book goes into all kinds of stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a quick article. Let's see here. This is from Tyler.com, and the author was Lucy Devine. And I think it was titled The Sons of Sam. So she writes here, ever since The Sons of Sam dropped on Netflix earlier this month, viewers have been gripped to the true crime series. The Sons of Sam, notice the S, plural, A Descent into Darkness, delves into the crimes of several serial killers and arsonist David Berkowitz, who murdered 6 people in 1977. The doc also explores a number of cases that were linked to the satanic cult, linked to Berkowitz at the time, including the devastating murder of Arlis Perry, which we just covered, or what we're covering now, who was killed in 1974. So who was Arlis and what actually happened? So we kind of know a lot of those details now. That way this information will be a little bit easier to grasp. Arlis was a 19-year-old newlywed who had recently moved to the Stanford University campus with her husband, Bruce Perry. The night she was killed, she had visited the Stanford Memorial Church to pray. It is believed Arlis and Bruce had been in an argument that evening, with Arlis heading to the church to cool off. Tragically, the next morning on the 13th, October 1974, Arlis's body was discovered. She had been brutally murdered and was reportedly naked from the waist down. Okay. It is reported she was found with an ice pick in her skull and a candle between her breasts. It was also reported she had been sexually assaulted with an altar candle. At the time, police investigated a security guard, Stephen Crawford, who was believed to have discovered Arlis's body, but the case remained unsolved for over 4 decades. Many believed Arlis's death was linked to a satanic cult that was enforced more with Berkowitz.
He is David Berkowitz.
Hold on. Yeah, actually, let's watch this real quick. I forgot I played this trailer. Let's watch this, and then I'll continue with the article. Wow. Well, it's reported she was found with an ice pick. We read that part. At the time, police investigated a security guard, Stephen Crawford, who is believed to have discovered Arlis's body. She remained unsolved for over 4 decades. Many believed Arlis's death was linked to a satanic cult. This was enforced more when Berkowitz sent Deputy Sheriff Lieutenant Terry Gardner a package, including a copy of The Anatomy of Witchcraft, I sent it from jail, which included the message, Arlis Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University. That's terrifying. Hey, what's up, Frank? It says here, Berkowitz never revealed who murdered Arlis, but as viewers of the documentary will know, 40 years on the heinous crime, Crawford's DNA was linked to the murder. The docuseries then showing body cam footage from the officers attempting to arrest the 72-year-old who shot himself. And that part we are, that's basically where we ended off. And this is what we'll finish with.
But killed himself as Santa Clara Sheriff's deputies moved in to make an arrest.
KTVU South Bay reporter Jesse Gary tells us Stephen Crawford seemed to know justice would eventually catch up with them, especially considering the progress in DNA technology.
Sheriff's investigators spent the overnight hours from Thursday into Friday searching the South San Jose apartment of murder suspect Stephen Crawford. Inside, detectives recovered evidence, including the cover to a book about serial killers and a suicide note dated 2 years prior.
I think that probably coincides with when our detective talked to him, and maybe at that point he thought that his time was up.
Santa Clara County Sheriff Lori Smith says 72-year-old Stephen Crawford had been in her department's crosshairs since 1974. Crawford was working as a security guard on the Stanford campus and found the body of Arlis Perry inside Memorial Church. The 19-year-old had been beaten, molested, and murdered, but technological limits of the 70s prevented detectives from building a case against Crawford until the advent of DNA testing.
There's a lot that's happened in the last couple decades.
San Mateo County forensic criminalist Alice Hilker says 4 decades ago, analysts would use enzyme and protein typing to try and match a suspect to a crime. But the large samples were less likely to produce large amounts of usable information. In the 80s, DNA testing moved to the forefront.
The new technology that came out in the 90s, called PCR, allows us to take small pieces of the DNA and make copies of them or amplify them at certain genetic markers. And that dramatically changed the world of DNA.
Smith says some of Perry's DNA was found on Crawford's clothing. Recent technological improvements provided enough evidence for a judge to sign off on the search warrant.
They were trying to get in and trying to talk to him. You could see them through the window trying to get him to open the door.
But officials say Crawford shot and killed himself as deputies tried to arrest him.
We look at this as closure, and we believe that we had solid evidence to arrest and even convict Stephen Crawford for the murder of Arlis Perry.
Hilker says continued improvements will lead to more cases, once thought too cold to crack, being solved.
It just gets better and better. The technology keeps improving. We can go smaller. We have more information.
Investigators have impounded Crawford's car and are going over it for clues. Sheriff Smith says it's uncertain what they'll find by scrutinizing all of the evidence. However, she says back in the 70s, there were multiple serial killers in Northern California, and investigators want to make sure Crawford isn't connected to any other killings. Outside the sheriff's headquarters here in San Jose, Jesse Gary, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
But we'll hang out for a little bit, but that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. Big up Zen Monkey, always in the house. Smooth Strong, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. You got it, Sonia. Oh, you're welcome, Vanessa. Thanks for participating in the chat. I appreciate that. Good to see you, Derek, as always.